Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time, we're taking a look at something pretty fascinating, I think.
Yeah.
The connection between politics and education,
Oh, absolutely.
especially in the Arab world.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be mainly using this book that you sent over called The Political Economy of Education in the Arab World.
Okay.
And it's by two authors, Hicham Alaoui and Robert Springborg.
Right.
And
Familiar with them?
yeah, and we'll be bringing in some other research too
Okay.
from the World Bank and other sources,
Yeah.
just to kind of give us a really well-rounded picture of what's going on.
Great.
So, when we were kind of prepping for this, I was struck by this almost like paradoxical finding that even though more people in the Arab world are getting educated, like they're spending more years in school,
Right.
there's this growing gap between that and what they're actually learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really counterintuitive. You think the more education you have, the more your personal outcomes are going to be improved. But
Yeah.
the World Bank actually shows that in a lot of Arab countries, education levels and even personal health are not matching up with their wealth.
Yeah, it's like having a Ferrari,
Right.
but not knowing how to drive.
Exactly. Yeah.
You have the potential, but something is...
Holding you back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is going on here?
Well, that is the question, and this is where things get interesting.
Okay.
The book talks about this idea of an emancipation gap,
Okay.
and it's based on some data from the World Values Survey.
Okay.
And this survey measures how much people value and believe in democratic principles.
Okay. So like free speech, fair elections, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Got it.
And they call this commitment to democracy, or CTD.
Okay. CTD.
CTD. Yep.
I like it.
And so the thing is that commitment to democracy is much lower in the Arab world compared to other regions.
Interesting.
And this difference is even bigger for people who are more educated.
So you're saying the more education people have in the Arab world,
Yeah.
the less likely they are to believe in democracy.
That's what the data shows.
That seems backwards.
It does seem that way, doesn't it?
You would think it'd be the opposite.
Yeah, because education is supposed to...
Open your mind up and...
Yeah, you're exposed to new ideas, and you should theoretically be more supportive of those types of principles.
Yeah.
But
that's not what we're seeing.
yeah, and so the obvious question is, well, is this because of Islam?
Right.
Or is it because of, the influence of oil wealth?
Yeah.
And the book kind of delves into all that.
Okay.
But the thing they really highlight is that there might be a strong link between this emancipation gap and the fact that many Arab countries have been ruled by authoritarian regimes.
Okay, so if you have a government that's not exactly like super into the idea of people like questioning things or like rocking the boat,
Right.
it kind of makes sense that that might trickle down into the education system.
Exactly. And I mean, think about it this way. Authoritarian regimes want to stay in power.
Right.
That's kind of their whole thing.
Yeah.
And one way to do that is to use education as a tool to control people.
Okay, so instead of teaching students to like think for themselves
Yeah.
and be critical and challenge the status quo,
Right.
maybe the focus is more on like obedience and loyalty to whoever's in charge.
That's right. And that's what researchers like Ishak Dewan,
Okay.
he studies this.
Okay.
He says that.
Yeah.
And there's evidence to back that up.
Okay.
The book actually analyzes history textbooks from Egypt, Tunisia, and Morocco.
Okay.
And it turns out these textbooks often present a very specific version of history.
Oh, so it's like you're only getting one side of the story.
Exactly.
And that's the side that the government wants you to hear.
That's right.
Interesting.
And so
Yeah, that makes sense.
if you grow up only learning that version of history,
Yeah.
you're probably going to have a very different view of the world.
Yeah, it's like they say history is written by the victors.
Yeah, well, in this case, it's more like history is written by the people in power.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point.
And this brings us to a specific case study where we can really see this in action.
Okay.
Egypt.
Ian and the pyramids.
Exactly. And a very complicated political system.
Yeah, very interesting. So let's unpack how this whole political context might be shaping their education system.
Okay, well, one thing that's really important is the military's influence on education.
Okay.
And it goes beyond just like funding.
Right.
They have a lot of control over how universities are run, and there's not much academic freedom for professors or students.
So it's not exactly like a hotbed of like free thought and debate.
Not really, no.
It seems like they're really trying to control the narrative.
You could say that.
Interesting.
Now, there's another thing to consider.
Okay.
President Sisi has been really pushing for more private and international universities.
Oh, okay. So more options for students.
Well, on the surface, it sounds good. But some people argue that it might not be about raising the quality of education for everyone.
Oh, okay.
It might be more about creating like a select loyal elite and
Mm.
attracting foreign investment.
Okay. And that makes sense with the whole, like, wanting to stay in power kind of thing.
Exactly. And remember that story about the Minister of Higher Education criticizing people for chasing Nobel Prizes?
Wait, hold on. Criticizing Nobel Prizes? But aren't those like a good thing?
You would think so.
Like you want your country to be winning those?
Yeah, it seems like a weird thing to criticize.
Yeah, it's like you don't want your people to be like achieving at the highest level.
Yeah. Well, some people see this as a sign that maybe Egypt is shifting away from valuing global recognition in academia and more towards focusing on things that are important to the regime.
So it's less about like contributing to the global knowledge base and more about
Yeah,
internal priorities.
exactly.
Wow. So Egypt's education system, it's like this balancing act between control and this desire for like international prestige, but then also trying to figure out what even counts as good education.
It's complicated.
It's very complicated.
And here's the thing.
Yeah.
Egypt isn't an isolated case.
Oh, really?
This whole dance between politics and education is happening all over the Arab world.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this is a bigger issue than just one country.
Yeah, it's a regional trend.
Okay, so if we're looking at this on a regional level, what are some of the other factors besides, government control that might be affecting the quality of education?
Well, one thing that comes up a lot is corruption.
Oh, corruption.
Yeah, like bribery,
Yeah.
people getting favors because of who they know instead of, what they actually deserve.
Right, so it's not a level playing field.
Exactly. And this isn't just happening in universities. It's affecting schools at every level.
Wow, okay.
There's research showing that, things like socioeconomic disparities and corruption at the local level can really impact school quality,
Interesting.
especially in countries like Tunisia.
Okay, so you're basically saying that in some cases, whether or not you get a good education depends more on like your background and your connections
Right.
than on your actual ability or how hard you work.
Sadly, that's the case in a lot of places.
Wow. That's pretty disheartening. So, I mean, is there any hope?
Yeah.
Are there any countries that have faced similar challenges
Yeah.
and managed to like turn things around?
So there is an interesting example.
Huh.
East Asia. They've had their own struggles with colonialism and authoritarianism too,
Right.
But somehow they managed to create these really successful education systems.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, I mean, what's their secret?
Right. Is it just like a cultural thing?
Yeah, like do they just like naturally value education more?
Right, maybe. But our sources actually push back on that simple explanation.
Okay.
They dig deeper and show that it's not just about culture. It's really about creating the right political and economic conditions.
Okay, so what are those right conditions?
What do they do differently?
Yeah, like is there something the Arab world could learn from their experience?
Well, to understand that, we got to talk about something called limited access orders,
Limited access orders.
or LAOs.
LAOs, okay.
Yeah, it's a fancy way of describing how power and resources are controlled in a society.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine a country where like a small elite group
Mm-hmm.
controls everything, the economy, the media, the education system.
Okay, yeah, I got it.
They get to decide who gets ahead and who doesn't.
Right, so how does this relate to education?
Well, some East Asian countries were able to transition from these closed systems, these limited access orders,
Yeah,
to more open and inclusive systems.
okay.
And that shift had a huge impact on education. It created a more meritocratic system where people could rise based on their talent and hard work, not just who they knew.
So it's about like leveling the playing field.
Exactly. And it also encouraged innovation
Yeah.
and saw education as key to economic growth.
So it's not just about spending more money on schools or like building fancier classrooms.
Right.
It's about changing the whole system.
It's about the underlying power structures
Yeah.
and how decisions are made.
So that's a pretty big takeaway then.
Yeah, it is.
If the Arab world wants to see real change in education, it's not enough to just tweak the curriculum or build more schools.
Yeah.
You have to address the fundamental ways power operates.
That's right.
Okay.
It's a tough challenge.
It is. So after all this kind of heavy stuff, is there any hope?
Yeah.
I mean, are there any signs that things could get better?
Yeah. Our sources do point to a few hopeful signs.
Okay, go.
One of them is the role of international donors
Okay.
who are supporting these things called change teams
Right.
within Arab education systems.
Change teams.
Change teams, yeah. They're groups of people working inside ministries of education or universities
Okay.
who are pushing for reforms from within the system.
So they're like little undercover agents of change.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I like it.
It's risky business, though.
Yeah, I bet.
Authoritarian regimes tend to see these reformers with a lot of suspicion.
That makes sense.
They might even see them as threats, similar to like human rights organizations.
Right, so they're kind of walking this tightrope between trying to improve things
Right.
and not getting shut down by the people in power.
Yeah, exactly.
So it sounds like the success of these change teams really depends on the specific political situation.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. So besides these change teams, what else is on the horizon for Arab education?
Well, there are some other trends that could shape the future.
Mm-hmm.
One that's particularly exciting is EdTech.
EdTech. Yeah, the use of technology in education.
Right.
A hot topic everywhere these days.
It is, and the Arab world is no exception.
Okay.
There's a lot of potential for technology to improve access to quality education, especially in remote areas or for marginalized communities.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Think online learning platforms, personalized learning apps, even virtual reality experiences.
That sounds pretty cool.
It does.
Yeah.
But as with any new tool, there are potential downsides.
Oh, of course, yeah.
One big worry is that if EdTech isn't implemented carefully and equitably,
Yeah.
it could actually widen the gap between those who have and those who don't have.
Right, so if not everyone has equal access to technology,
Right.
it's not going to be a solution for everybody.
Exactly. It's not just about giving everyone a fancy new laptop.
Right.
It's about using technology in ways that actually benefit everyone.
Okay, so access is key.
Absolutely.
But what about the content of what's being taught?
Right.
We were talking earlier about those biased history textbooks.
Yeah.
But it's a bigger issue than just textbooks, right?
It's a much bigger question about the whole philosophy of education.
Right.
What values are we trying to instill?
Yeah.
What skills are important? Should we focus on memorization or critical thinking?
Yeah. Are we preparing students for the real world?
Right. And then there's the question of religion and tradition.
Oh, yeah. How do those fit into a modern education system?
It's a complex conversation, especially in the Arab world.
Yeah, I bet. And I imagine there are a lot of different opinions.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's probably a pretty sensitive topic.
It is.
So it's about finding that balance between respecting tradition
Right.
and also preparing students for the future.
Exactly.
Okay, so where does language fit into all of this?
Oh, that's another big debate.
Because in a lot of Arab countries, the language used in schools isn't necessarily the language that people speak at home, right?
That's a key point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this language barrier can really affect how well students learn.
Yeah, I can imagine it's kind of like trying to learn math in a language you don't really understand.
Exactly. Some people argue that teaching in local dialects instead of modern standard Arabic would make education more accessible.
It makes sense.
Right, it's more natural.
Huh.
But then some people worry that this could undermine the importance of a shared Arabic language and identity.
Okay, I see. So it's like you're weighing the benefits of being culturally relevant
Right.
against the need for like a unified national language.
Right. And then there are also practical considerations, like do you have enough textbooks and teachers in all these different dialects?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's not a simple issue.
No. It sounds like Arab education is facing all these different challenges
It is.
and trying to figure out how to move forward in the 21st century.
Exactly.
It seems like there are no easy answers.
Yep.
And it requires a lot of long-term commitment and dialogue
It does.
and solutions that are tailored to each specific context.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about copying what other countries have done.
Right.
It's about finding what works best for each unique situation.
That's a key insight. And it's also important to remember that education reform is not just about governments and institutions.
Okay.
It's about people.
People, right?
Yeah. Passionate teachers.
Yeah.
Parents who care about their kids' future.
Yeah.
And students themselves demanding a better education.
So even though there are all these challenges,
Right.
there's still reason to be hopeful.
Absolutely. Change is rarely easy or fast,
Yeah.
but it is possible.
Yeah.
And it starts with recognizing that education is about empowering people
Right.
and shaping the future.
That brings us back to that big question we started with. What needs to change for the Arab world to really reach its full potential in education? What do you think?
It really comes down to, recognizing the power of education. Like, it's not just about memorizing facts.
Right.
It's about learning how to think critically,
Yeah.
how to question things,
Yeah.
how to solve problems,
Right.
and ultimately how to be an active participant in your community and in the world.
Yeah, it's like that saying, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day.
Right.
Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime.
Exactly. But in this case, it's not just about fishing.
Right.
It's about navigating a world that's constantly changing.
Yeah, and figuring out how to be a part of that change.
Exactly.
And it's not a one-way street either.
Right.
Education is not just about governments or institutions telling people what to think.
No, it's a two-way exchange.
Yeah, it's a partnership between those who provide education and those who receive it.
And it requires trust.
Right.
And respect.
Yeah.
And a shared belief that education is a fundamental right.
Not a privilege.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And it's inspiring to see so many people in the Arab world fighting for that. Right?
Yeah. There's so many dedicated teachers,
Right.
parents, students,
Yeah.
all working to create a better future.
It's like that quote.
Yeah.
Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world.
It's not about force, though.
Right.
It's about empowerment,
Yeah.
knowledge, critical thinking, hope.
So well said.
Hmm.
So I guess the question we're left with is,
Yeah.
what can we do?
Right. What role can each of us play?
Yeah, even those of us who are not in the Arab world.
Yeah. How can we support this movement for educational change?
That's something I think we all need to think about, because ultimately education is about creating a better future for everyone.
I agree.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our deep dive.
Sounds good.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
And it's clear that the challenges facing education in the Arab world are complex. But there's also a lot of hope.
Yeah. The passion and commitment of so many individuals is truly inspiring.
So as we sign off, we want to leave you with this one thought.
Right.
If education is the key to unlocking a society's potential,
Yeah.
what can we do to help turn that key?
Great question.
Keep those questions alive, keep exploring, and join us next time for another deep dive.